"Sir, I need you to sit down right now." The flight attendant's voice was shaky and scared. She stood in the aisle of the Boeing 787, her arms held out like she was trying to stop something bad from happening. Marcus Webb, 83 years old, did not move. He stood still, a small, quiet person in all the chaos of the cabin. His eyes, the color of a faded sky, were not looking at the flight attendant. They were looking at the flickering emergency lights above her head. The man beside her, a federal air marshal in a wrinkled suit, stepped forward. His face showed he was trying to be in charge. "You heard her, old man. Sit down. This is a federal situation." His hand moved toward a bulge under his jacket. He was trying to scare Marcus. Marcus's gaze shifted, looking at the marshal for a moment. There was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, tired calm that seemed to make the younger man even more nervous. The situation had gotten bad very quickly. There was a sharp, acrid smell of burning electronics. The plane suddenly lurched. Then things started failing all over. The cabin lights flickered and went dark. The emergency strips came on, glowing orange. The in-flight entertainment screens went black. But the scariest thing was the silence from the cockpit. For 10 minutes, the flight crew had been trying to reach the captain. Their knocks on the reinforced door became more and more frantic. But there was no answer. The plane was like a ghost ship at 37,000 feet. The passengers were starting to fall apart. A woman behind Marcus was openly crying. A businessman was shouting into a dead cell phone. The air was thick with the taste of fear. The air marshal, whose name was Agent Rivera, seemed to think that being in charge meant pushing around the one person who wasn't panicking. "I am not going to ask you again," Rivera said. Her voice was low and mean. She stepped closer, invading Marcus's space. "We have a possible cockpit problem. The last thing I need is some confused old man walking around the plane." Marcus's voice when he spoke was raspy but clear, cutting through all the noise. "The transponder is off." Rivera blinked. "What?" "The plane's transponder," Marcus said. "It's not sending out our position." His eyes looked distant, as if he were seeing something far beyond the plane. "And we've changed direction. We're banking slightly southeast, away from our Chicago flight path." Rivera's face got tight. The old man was either very smart or very crazy. Rivera decided to believe he was crazy. "How could you possibly know that? Did you see that on your little movie screen before it went out?" "Sit down now." Marcus ignored him. He was listening to the engines. His head was tilted at a slight angle. The sound was wrong. One engine was running rough. He could feel a subtle shaking in the soles of his worn leather shoes. He had spent his whole life learning what machines sound like when they are in trouble, and this one was screaming. "The flight crew needs to seal the forward galley," Marcus said. His voice now had a quiet power. "The fire is in the main avionics bay, just below the cockpit floor. That's why they're not responding. They're probably already gone. The smoke would have gotten them first." The flight attendant gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Rivera's face went from suspicion to pure anger. "That's it. You're done," Rivera hissed. She reached out to grab Marcus's arm. "You're making people panic. You are a threat to this flight." Marcus didn't flinch. He just looked down at the hand that was about to grab his thin arm. "Son," he said, his voice soft but filled with old, heavy wisdom, "you have no idea what a real threat to this flight looks like, but you will very soon if you don't let me help." The cabin shuddered again. This time it was much more violent. Passengers screamed. The plane was sick. The people in charge didn't know what to do. Rivera saw the rising tide of panic in the cabin. She realized that grabbing an 83-year-old man might cause a full-blown riot. She let her hand drop, but her eyes promised payback. She pointed a shaking finger at Marcus. "You stay right there, don't move, don't speak," she ordered. Then she turned to try to calm the rest of the cabin, but no one was listening to her. They were watching Marcus. They were watching the old man who stood strong in the aisle. He seemed to know things they didn't. In their terror, they held on to that small hope. Marcus knew the fire would soon damage the hydraulic lines that ran through the avionics bay. Once that happened, they wouldn't be a ghost ship anymore. They would be a coffin. Time was running out. The only person standing in his way was a woman who saw a problem, not a solution. Rivera continued to act like she was in charge. She barked orders at the flight attendants, who ran around trying to look busy but feeling lost. She saw herself as the hero, the shield against chaos. In her mind, Marcus was just another problem to manage. The old man's calm was annoying. "What's with the watch?" Rivera sneered. She noticed the object on Marcus's wrist for the first time. It was an old big chronograph. Its steel case was scarred and pitted. The leather band was cracked with age. It looked like something from a museum. "Your grandpa give you that?" Rivera said meanly. "Maybe it can tell you what time we're all going to die." The insult was cruel. It came from fear and frustration. Marcus glanced down at the watch. Its face had many dials and hands. The crystal was scratched from 1,000 impacts. He didn't see an antique. He saw something else entirely. He saw the faint glow of this watch's hands in a smoke-filled cockpit. It was the only light. He was wrestling with the controls of a broken aircraft over enemy territory. His co-pilot, young and terrified, was lit by that same faint green light for one split second before the world outside the window exploded in white. The watch was a reminder that he had faced death before and survived. It was a promise he had made to a man who didn't come home. Marcus looked back at Rivera. His expression didn't change. The insult had bounced right off him. It meant nothing against all of his history. The plane dropped a few hundred feet. Another wave of screams went through the cabin. The situation was now critical. The smoke was thicker, leaking from the seams around the cockpit door. The flight crew was frozen. Rivera was focused on the wrong problem. Marcus knew that if they couldn't talk to someone on the ground, someone who understood the language of flying, they had only minutes left. His eyes scanned the cabin with purpose. He was looking for something useful. He saw it when one of the flight attendants stumbled. Her service bag spilled into the aisle. Among the packets and little bottles was a small handheld emergency radio. It was used for talking to people on the ground. It had a limited range, but it was the only chance they had. He moved. For an 83-year-old man, he was fast. His movements were smooth and practiced. They showed forgotten training. He grabbed the radio before Rivera could stop him. "What do you think you're doing?" Rivera yelled. She lunged for Marcus, but she was stopped. A young woman in a university sweatshirt put her leg out into the aisle. Rivera tripped and fell. "Sorry," she said. She didn't sound sorry at all. At the same time, a young man in an army uniform stood up. He was a private first class going home. He positioned himself between Rivera and Marcus. He didn't say a word. He just stood there like a wall. He had seen the same thing the young woman had. Marcus had quiet competence. Rivera just bluffed. They had made their choice. Rivera scrambled to her feet. Her face was purple with anger. "You are all under arrest. You are interfering with a federal agent." But her threats meant nothing. Marcus had already turned away. The small radio was in his hand. He was struggling with the small knobs. His old fingers had trouble. The young soldier leaned in. "Need help with that, sir?" the soldier asked. "The guard frequency," Marcus rasped. His eyes stayed on the device. 243 megahertz. It's a long shot. The young soldier's hands were quick and sure. He tuned the radio. The static hissed and crackled. He handed it back. "It's ready, sir," the soldier said. Marcus lifted the radio to his lips. Rivera was still trying to push past the soldier. She was shouting about rules and prison time. But no one was listening. The entire cabin was silent. They were all watching the old man with the radio. They held their breath. Marcus pressed the talk button. His first words were lost in static. He tried again. This time his voice was low and powerful. It sounded like it came from another person, another lifetime. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is civilian flight 73 Niner. Any military asset on guard. Do you copy?" He paused, listening to the static. Nothing. He took a breath and tried again. This time he added 6 words that changed everything. "Requesting immediate assistance. This is Ugly 6. I repeat, Ugly 6 is on board and assuming command." The call went out into the sky. A ghost calling from a dying machine. At the Air Route Traffic Control Center in Aurora, Illinois, the world was a series of green lights on dark screens. But one light was missing. Flight 739 had disappeared from their screens 10 minutes ago. The phones were ringing. A quiet panic was building. Then on a speaker for the emergency guard frequency, a voice cut through the static. It was weak and fuzzy. A junior controller almost didn't hear it. He was ready to ignore it. Civilian Flight 73-9er, Ugly 6. On board and assuming command, the voice said. The junior controller frowned. Ugly 6? What is that? Some kind of prank? Behind him, a man stood up from his desk so fast his chair flew backward and hit the wall. He was a senior supervisor, a retired Air Force colonel named Martin. His face, which was usually calm, was white as a ghost. Get me a fix on that transmission, Martin roared. His voice cut across the entire control room. Now scramble the nearest alert fighters. Tell them it's a Nightingale event. I want 2 jets on that plane's wing 5 minutes ago. The room, which had been tense, exploded into action. Controllers who had been staring helplessly at a blank spot on their screen now had something to do. A Nightingale event. Most of them didn't even know what that meant. It was a code so old, so deeply buried, it was practically a myth. Martin was already on a red phone, a direct line to NORAD. This is Aurora Center. We have a Nightingale declaration. I repeat, a Nightingale declaration from call sign Ugly 6. The silence on the other end was deep. Then a voice, a 2-star general, came on the line, sharp and clear. Confirm call sign. Ugly 6, General. Confirmed. Another pause. The general's voice was strained. My God, is the file active? Martin was already typing frantically at a terminal. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He was accessing a system he hadn't used in 20 years. A file appeared. Most of it was blacked out with redaction marks. But 2 words were clear. Lawson, Marcus, and below them, the call sign. Ugly 6. File is active, General, Martin said. His voice shook slightly. It's him. It's Colonel Lawson. He's on that plane. The general's orders were immediate and absolute. The full power of the United States military was now focused on one point in the sky above the American Midwest. The legend was alive. He needed help. Back on Flight 739, Air Marshal Rivera had finally pushed past the young soldier. She lunged for Marcus. Her face was pure fury. Her authority was shattered. Her fear was in complete control. Give me the radio, old man, Rivera snarled. Her hand closed on Marcus's shoulder. I swear to God I will put you in restraints. You are a danger to this aircraft. You're probably the cause of all this. This was her last desperate try. By calling Marcus the threat, she could regain control. She was ready to physically tackle the 83-year-old man to force him into a seat and cuff him. She was a woman pushed past the edge, her training and judgment eaten up by the crisis. The other passengers shouted in protest. But Rivera was beyond listening. She was committed to her fatal mistake. She was convinced she was the hero. It happened without a sound. On one moment, there was nothing but gray empty sky outside the windows. The next, they were there. 2 of them. Sleek, angular shapes of impossible technology. They appeared as if they had materialized out of the air. They were F-35 Lightning IIs, the most advanced fighter jets in the world. They weren't just near the plane. They were glued to its wings. Their cockpits were so close that the passengers could see the pilots inside. Their helmeted heads were perfectly still. A collective gasp went through the cabin. The raw power of the machines was terrifying and awesome. They slid through the air with a silent, deadly grace. The sight was so sudden, so overwhelming, that it shocked everyone into absolute silence. The crying stopped. The shouting died. Every eye was fixed on the military jets hanging in the air beside them. Rivera froze. Her hand was still on Marcus's shoulder. Her mouth was hanging open. Like everyone else, she assumed the worst. They had been identified as a threat. They were being escorted to their doom. Then a new voice filled the cabin. It crackled through the plane's own internal address system. It was clear, calm, and powerful. It wasn't coming from a flight attendant. It was patched in from outside. Ugly 6, this is Viper 1. We have you on our wing. Your signal is weak, but we read you. Command is on the line. What is your status, sir? The word sir hung in the air. Electric. Rivera's hand dropped from Marcus's shoulder as if it had been burned. Her face, which had been flushed with anger, went bone white. She looked from the fighter jet outside the window to the old man in the aisle. Her mind couldn't process what was happening. The voice from the F-35 pilot came again. This time it was addressing the entire aircraft. Civilian aircraft 73-9er. This is Viper 1 of the United States Air Force. We are responding to a Priority 1 Nightingale distress call from Colonel Marcus Lawson. Please cede communication authority to him immediately. I repeat, all flight authority is now deferred to Colonel Lawson. The name echoed through the cabin. Colonel Marcus Lawson, the quiet old man in the worn shoes. Viper 1 wasn't finished. His voice took on a tone of deep, almost mythic reverence. For the crew of 73 Niner, the call sign Ugly 6 was retired in 1971. Its last user flew a secret aircraft over the Asha Valley. After suffering catastrophic systems failure, he guided his aircraft and his crew home using nothing but a magnetic compass and the watch on his wrist. That man is on your aircraft. I suggest you listen to him. A ripple of understanding and pure awe spread through the passengers. They looked at Marcus, truly seeing him for the first time. They saw not a frail senior citizen, but a giant, a living piece of history who had just woken from a long sleep. The young soldier snapped to perfect attention in the middle of the aisle. The student who had tripped Rivera stared with her hand over her mouth. Rivera herself looked like she had been struck by lightning. She staggered back. Her authority wasn't just challenged, it was utterly destroyed by a power she couldn't understand. Marcus was no longer a passenger, he was the commander. The radio in Marcus's hand crackled again. This time the voice was older, rough, and carried unmistakable power. It was the general from NORAD. Ugly 6. This is Sunder Devil. Good to hear your voice, Colonel. It's been a while. Sunder Devil, Marcus replied. His own voice was steady, like he was talking to an old friend over coffee. We have an avionics fire. Cockpit is unresponsive. Presumed lost. We are flying on compromised hydraulics and running out of fuel on the starboard engine. Understood, Ugly 6. Vipers 1 and 2 will guide you in. They'll give you the glide path to Green Valley Air National Guard Base. The runway is being foamed as we speak. Can you get to the controls? Negative, Marcus said. The door is sealed, but I can talk someone through it. There's a first officer, young, terrified. He needs a calm voice. A new voice. The plane's first officer stammered over the internal comms. Sir, Colonel Lawson, I can hear you. I don't know what to do. And just like that, Marcus went to work. His voice became calm and precise. It cut through the young pilot's fear. He gave instructions for dumping fuel, for managing the failing engine, for preparing the cabin for a high-speed emergency landing. He was like a conductor leading an orchestra of survival. The voice of the general, Sunder Devil, came back on the line one last time. His message was directed at the air marshal. Agent Rivera, your service weapon has been flagged. Your credentials have been suspended pending a full review of your conduct. You will offer Colonel Lawson your full and complete cooperation. You will not speak unless spoken to. Is that understood? Rivera could only manage a choked, pathetic nod. Her entire career and sense of self were collapsing in one public rebuke. After Marcus had guided the first officer through the most critical preparations for landing, he turned to the humbled, broken air marshal. There was no triumph in his eyes, no, I told you so. There was only quiet sadness. Fear makes you deaf, son, Marcus said softly. His voice was barely a whisper. It's a cage you build for yourself. Courage isn't about not having the cage. It's about finding the key. He glanced down at the old watch on his wrist. Its scarred face was a testament to a lifetime of finding that key. He saw a flash of fire and twisted metal. He was young again, hanging upside down in the cockpit of a strange, bat-winged aircraft. The plane was never supposed to exist. Smoke filled his lungs. His pilot, a man named Jesse, was gone. His navigator, Mike, was bleeding in the seat beside him. It was Mike who had given him the watch a week before. For good luck, Mike had said. As Mike's life faded, he had grabbed Marcus's arm. They called us the Ugly 6 because there were 6 of us, and the bird was ugly as sin. He coughed. Blood was on his lips. But you get them all home. You're Ugly 6 now. Marcus had flown that broken, ugly machine back across a border it had no business crossing. He navigated by the stars in that watch. He carried the ghosts of his friends with him. The call sign was a burden, a promise, and an honor. A piece of his soul he thought he had buried forever. The landing was violent. A bone-jarring, screeching arrival as the crippled 777 hit the foam-covered runway at Green Valley. But the fuselage held. The landing gear held. Marcus's instructions, relayed from the aisle to a terrified first officer he had never met, had been perfect. As the plane slowed to a stop, surrounded by fire trucks and emergency vehicles, a profound, breathless silence fell over the cabin. Then someone started to clap. The applause grew. It swelled into a thunderous, tearful ovation. It wasn't for the pilot. It was for the old man who had refused to sit down. When the emergency slides deployed and the doors opened, the first person to come up the steps was not a paramedic. It was the four-star general from the radio. He ignored everyone else. His eyes scanned the cabin until he found Marcus. He walked down the aisle. The clapping fell silent. He stopped in front of Marcus. His back was ramrod straight. He rendered a salute so sharp and precise it seemed to cut the air. "Colonel Lawson," the general said. His voice was thick with emotion. "It is an honor, sir." Marcus, the unassuming hero, slowly and wearily returned the salute. In the weeks that followed, the story of Flight 739 became a quiet legend. The FAA and the Air Marshal Service launched a joint investigation. Agent Rivera was reassigned to a desk in a basement office. She would be forced to retire soon. A new training program, unofficially called the Lawson Protocol, was developed. It taught federal agents and flight crews how to identify and use unconventional assets during a crisis. It taught them to look for quiet competence instead of loud authority. The airline sent Marcus a formal letter of apology. They offered him free flights for life. He politely declined. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Marcus was sitting in a small coffee shop near his home. He was reading a newspaper. The bell above the door chimed. A woman walked in. She hesitated just inside the doorway. It was Rivera. She was no longer wearing a suit, just a plain polo shirt and jeans. She looked smaller, diminished. She walked over to Marcus's table. "Colonel Lawson," she said quietly. Her voice was small. Marcus looked up. His expression was neutral. He simply nodded. "I wanted to apologize," Rivera stammered. She was twisting a napkin in her hands. "What I did, how I treated you, there's no excuse. I was scared, and you were right. I was in a cage. I'm sorry." Marcus folded his newspaper and set it on the table. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Sit down. Let me buy you a cup of coffee." Rivera sat. A quiet understanding passed between them. A lesson learned. A moment of grace offered and accepted. If this story of unassuming courage moved you, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories of the heroes who walk among us every day.